Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Breaking the Game show. And we are closing out what I am calling Breaking the Game NBA Draft Weekend. And I can't think of a better way to close out any weekend than to link up with one of the brightest minds in the NBA draft community. Today, we have the host, or one of the hosts, excuse me, of the Which Carolina podcast. And he's also a contributor to hoopprospects.com. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Lee Branscome. Lee, what's up, brother?
Oh man, we're less than a week away, Steven. And anytime I can get on breaking the game, it's a good Sunday. So appreciate you having me on. And man, we are coming up against it. So definitely doing a little bit of last minute cramming, last minute adjustments, crossing my T's, dotting my I's, and I'll have my final big board out. I probably should do more throughout the process, but I'm just the type, I do one final board like the night before the draft, put it out. And so I'll have that out Wednesday night. So kind of just doing everything I need to do to make sure that's as tidy as possible.
Yeah, and I can't blame you for that. I've put out a couple revisions, so to speak, as for my big board, and I understand, the wanting to be conservative and having one final product that you just put out there, and you do such a tremendous job. I can't wait to see where you actually have guys place. I've been keeping up with you on social media and whatnot, and listening to your commentary on certain prospects. I'm ready just to see the final product, man.
Me too, man. And honestly, it's probably more bandwidth than anything. Like I think maybe next year, if I can get the time, I'd like to put out a couple different iterations, like through the process, so people can see kind of how my opinions change. But for now, a lot of that just happens behind the scenes, and I'll get the final product out there.
Yeah, and I'll be standing by for that release out on Wednesday. So, Lee, we're coming into my mock draft. I've had a couple of, tremendous guests on. Day one, I had Nathan Grubel from Draft Deeper. Yesterday, I had the pleasure of hosting, Raphael Barlow of the Locked On, podcast network. He came on and kind of hit my middle of my first round. And, Lee, it's one of those things to where, like, you would think, oh, okay, I'm in the back end of a mock draft. Like, how fun is this? But for nerds like us, dude, it's awesome. We get to talk about some of the unsung heroes coming into this draft. And, later on in the show, we'll talk about guys that you're high on, low on, maybe even a couple of second round steals potentially. But, man, you have the pleasure of coming on the show today and starting off with the first pick in our mock draft for part 3. It's a very important pick, and for Off the Ball Network, man, we have a lot of Knicks fans in our circle, and we're going to open up here with my 21st pick. I selected Kai Jones from Texas, the 6'11", roughly 220-pound big man, really high on his, physical attributes, the quick twitch that he has, the second bounce, the defensive potential is there, shows a little bit of flashes in other areas too. Texas had a pretty crowded front court, so maybe a little bit more room to play out in New York. And with, injuries that we've seen to Mitchell Robinson, will they, won't they, with Nerlens Noel, I think that Kai Jones makes sense here if he's available. What do you think?
Yeah, look, if Kai Jones is available in the 20s, I think the risk reward profile becomes so tempting and tantalizing. I think teams would be kind of falling over themselves to get him in the 20s. I'm super high on Kai Jones. So I'll just start by saying that. Like, I think Kai Jones is easily a lottery talent. I wouldn't be surprised to see him go in the lottery. I know most people, I think the consensus is more around kind of where you have him, like late teens, early 20s seems to be where a lot of people are mocking him. I think the only like slight pushback maybe I'd give to this is there a little too much overlap with Obi Toppin from last year? But I think where Kai separates himself from Toppin is what you mentioned earlier, the defensive versatility. Like, Kai Jones can switch out onto guards and wings, sit his hips down, and slide and play defense. And that, from a 6'11", versatile big defender, is obviously just like incredibly valuable in today's NBA. I was actually tweeting about Kai Jones earlier. Like, another thing you kind of alluded to, his ability and flashes. All they are really flashes right now, but like pump fake, 2 dribble pull-ups, face up, jab step, pull up 3. pump fake one dribble pull ups. Like he's got some off the dribble creation, shot creation that is just super unique for his size. But even if that stuff doesn't work out, he shot 38% from three this year, but it was on
Yep.
super low volume. So you kind of have to take that with a grain of salt. But like, even if he doesn't become a super effective floor stretcher, even if the off the dribble shot creation is nothing but flashes, he's still a hyper elite athlete. He's still going to rim run, rim roll, rim protect. He's still a versatile switchy defender. So like, I know Kai's kind of being framed as this massive risk reward, and there's some truth to that. Don't get me wrong. He's a swing for the fences for sure. But I actually think his floor is a little higher than most people are giving him credit for. Like, I just don't really necessarily see him completely failing. Whereas I think most people are kind of taking the approach for Kai of like, he's either going to be a star or he's going to be out of the league in 5 years. And I don't see the variance quite as big as that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that he does have some unique NBA ready skills already. The athleticism certainly helps out. You wonder if his body is going to hold up with some of the bigger centers in the NBA, right? But there's already those questions with players in the NBA already. So why not go ahead and draft the kid if you like him, right? So that'll close out pick 21 for my mock draft. And we'll roll into a team that definitely underperformed due to expectations and what they already achieved last season. Obviously, injuries are a name to the game, a lot of turnover in their roster. But ultimately, the Los Angeles Lakers, they find themselves here at pick 22. I went with a player that I think it's a little bit harder to gauge where he's going to be long term. But I think that if you're an NBA team that's wanting to compete now, you saw what he did in college. I think that he helps you from day one, just obviously being a rotational player coming in, maybe working his way up to giving you some starter minutes. And that is Nashawn Highland or Bones Highland, depending on which name you want to give him. You know, coming out of VCU, 6'3", a little undersized, probably need to put on a little bit more weight. But we've seen undersized guards succeed in the NBA, even today's NBA. He has a knack for hitting some pretty difficult shots coming out of VCU. And that's something that if you watched LA play this last season, they need a little bit of help in the shot creation department. And that's where I think Bones can fit in with LA here, Lee.
Yeah, big fan of Bones Highland. Obviously, he had arguably, I'd say, the best combine performance. He only played one game, but he balled out in that game and then shut it down. Big time shooting prospect, like movement shooter, coming off screens. Does a really, really good job of like always making sure his body gets square, even when he's on the move, which is always a pretty good indicator of like a big time shooting prospect. You pair that with like effortless range. Like he's a guy who's just as comfortable shooting at 2 to 3 steps behind the line than he is right on the line, which does bode well for like NBA range, obviously. As you said, kind of like a developing creator. I don't think he's like a superb facilitation guard at this point, but he's fully capable of kind of getting in the lane, one read passing and things of that nature. You know, I do think LA probably goes guard or wing here because like Caruso is a free agent. He gives them perimeter defense. Highland doesn't necessarily give them much perimeter defense, but as you said, kind of the Lakers' hole right now is like ancillary shot creation around their 2 stars. So, you know, I think this makes a ton of sense. Wouldn't be shocked at all. I think the only like wrench here could be that what LA and what LeBron teams seem to always do is trade the pick away. Like that's certainly possible. But if they stay here, yeah, I wouldn't be shocked to see Bones go 22 to LA. There's a couple other guards that I like that I think might be maybe slightly more capable of helping right away if they keep the pick, but as like a long-term high upside creation. I've kind of comped Bones to Malik Monk a good bit. I think Bones is probably a better shooter, but there's kind of similar body types, offensive microwave types.
Yep.
So yeah, I think it's a fine pick. I like Highland a lot.
I do too. And again, when looking at where I have these guys picked, for the listeners, I have a big board and then I have a mock draft. And Lee, when you have a big board and a mock draft, the way it's mocked doesn't always go in order of how great you think these players are going to be down the line. There's fit involved with there too. And Lakers, they've been rumored to be in the point guard market,
Yep.
since the season ended, right? They're shopping for any and all point guards, it seems like. And if they can't get one, obviously being able to draft one, and obviously too, for the name of the mock draft, the trades have been nixed. Nobody's trading anything.
Right.
Oklahoma City's keeping all 32 of their picks this season, so that's just the way that it's going to be for for the rest of this mock. So, all right, Lee, I have an interesting prospect, and it's interesting just for how polarizing he can be depending on how you evaluate him. But man, the Houston Rockets are on the clock. They got consecutive picks. They have this one and then the following. They're looking to build off of losing James Harden.
Yep.
Earlier in this mock draft, I had them selecting Jalen Suggs. Now that one may shock people because you only see Jalen Green, maybe even Evan Mobley on most other mocks. But when I look at Houston, I see a team that is in the midst of an identity crisis. Yep. And I think that Jalen Suggs gives your team an identity. I comp him a lot in that aspect to Tyrese Halliburton, a guy that we both loved coming into the draft last season.
Yep.
May not be the hands down best player that you could get there, but with the team that has had all of their players just say that they're unhappy and leave, the general manager, the coach, everybody is leaving. You need players to help create an identity. That's what I thought Jalen Suggs did for this team. And how else can you improve from losing James Harden? I don't know, maybe draft a guard who went to Arizona State and wear the number 13 to come in and be his kind of pseudo replacement here. That being Josh Christopher, the young man out of Arizona State. Team that had high expectations, didn't really meet up to those. A lot of guys with similar skill sets. But I still think that Josh Christopher has a home in the NBA, tremendous upside, an athletic freak of nature. Didn't really shoot that well, but Lee, if you believe that free throws can kind of help, build upon a player's ability to shoot from deep, that's there as well. So what do you think about Christopher going to Houston here?
Yeah, so this is kind of one of those, like, I'm how should I put this? I think Josh Christopher is a first round prospect. I'm not quite as high on him as some others, but this is a situation where I just love the fit, like particularly as a compliment to Suggs, who went number 2 in your mock draft. And just for the record, like, I completely agree with you. I think Jalen Suggs is definitely worthy of going second in this draft. I do think he's a slightly better prospect than Jalen Green. I'm still trying to decide who I prefer between Mobley and Suggs, and it is tough.
Yeah.
I'll figure that out in the next 3 days.
Good luck, buddy.
But I think this is a really nice complementary backcourt guard to Suggs, both physical, both solid athletes, but offer a little bit of different profiles. Suggs more of an on the ball creator, facilitator. Christopher a little bit more kind of like wired to score, projects as more of like a true 2 guard kind of in his future. You're right, the shooting's got to improve. The ball handling probably needs to improve a little bit, but I think Houston, I think they'd be thrilled to get Josh Christopher here and kind of solidify that young backcourt, of course, to go along with Kevin Porter Jr. And then you're all of a sudden looking at like a pretty interesting young core down in Houston, who, like you said, is just in complete rebuild mode.
Yeah, and again, this is a guy that is polarizing. He's kind of wide ranging on a number of mocks. And just real quick, while I got you on the topic of Suggs, because it doesn't feel like people are really talking about him. He's just kind of penciled in to go to Toronto, and that's just the end of it. And what's interesting to me, I talked to Raphael about this. I've talked to some of the guys like Chris LeBron at Off the Ball about this. It's like when you hear Cade Cunningham, there's like nothing but promise and potential. But when you hear people evaluating Suggs, it's like he's a 24-year-old, 5th year senior coming into the pros, and people forget like the kid is a freshman coming in, and that he also can develop and get better too. And plus, what we've seen from him, the interviews that we've heard, he seems like he's going to come into the NBA and be an absolute workhorse too in the gym. So what are your thoughts about the way that there really hasn't been much buzz surrounding Suggs lately?
Yeah, it's interesting because like he had such a kind of magical March Madness run. Normally that kind of catapults prospects into buzz, but he never really has caught that. And I think that's a really good way of putting it. It's kind of like people, it seems like the opinion makers around him almost consider him as like, yeah, like they talk about him like he's an older prospect, like he's some type of finished product, which I don't think could be farther from the truth. I think another thing conceptually that people get wrong with Suggs a little bit is, oh, like he was in this perfect situation around all these great players in the perfect system, which there is some truth to. Sure. I just subscribe to the opinion that Suggs created that perfect situation more than he was a beneficiary of it. And like you take Jalen Suggs away from that team, and all of a sudden, I don't think the gears fit as well as they did. Like he was the driving force on that team from a ball creation standpoint, and obviously like Kispert's awesome. Drew Timme was incredible. Like Mark Few's probably the best coach in college basketball. So like I realize that I understand how people get to that point. I just think if you really dig in and watch the film on Jalen Suggs, you would realize that he was the straw stirring the drink rather than the other way around. And I think that will shine through early in his career in the NBA. I'm pretty confident of that. I would be comfortable taking him as high as 2, but I will say if he falls to 4 to Toronto, that may be the best situation for him and may allow him to push for Rookie of the Year and things of that nature.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that. And, I'm obviously a big fan of him too. So it's nice that we can both sit here and speak glowingly of Suggs and, hopefully nothing but the best for him. All right. So continuing on here with the draft, as we mentioned earlier, the Houston Rockets have the potential to have the 23rd and the 24th pick in this year's draft. Now we had them take Suggs second overall. They just took Josh Christopher. Why not now address potential front court player that they can implement here? I like Daron Sharp out of North Carolina coming in here. He didn't really get as much playing time as the other guys that are drafted ahead of him and even behind him. But the minutes that he did put up, he averaged close to 10 and 8, coming off the bench for North Carolina. He had a few big games as the season progressed. I think that he's already got an NBA ready frame. At 6'10", about 265, like this kid is going to come in and not just kind of be shoved around. I like his ability to run pick and roll, obviously more as a roll man now, but this is another big man that displayed flashes at North Carolina. And even though it was kind of a disappointing season up to their standards, I still think that Sharp can come in here at 24 and address a pretty big need for Houston and even play alongside a Christian Wood, who we know that can stretch the floor.
Yeah, so again, just absolutely love this pick. I have been of the opinion throughout this entire cycle that Daron Sharp is a first-round prospect. He's another guy that is somewhat forgotten, I think, in conversations. You just don't see him kind of brought up one way or the other, really. Like, I'm not saying people are necessarily too low on him. I just think he just doesn't get discussed all that much. And part of that is because UNC wasn't great this year. The other piece of that is something you alluded to. He was part of a four-man post rotation at UNC: Walker Kessler, Garrison Brooks, Armando Bacot, and Daron Sharp. So, he only played 19 minutes a game as a freshman. That being said, he led the ACC in total rebound percentage. He's just an absolute glass cleaner. He was top 10 in block percentage. He's got really impressive kind of uncommon for his size, like defensive anticipation skills. Like you see him get out in the passing lanes at times. He's also a really good passer for his size as well, too. You see that in the high-low stuff at UNC. Got some really good touch on like his high-low over the top, bounce passes to back cutters. I think that'll pair really well. Like, I guess what I'm trying to say is I think it's a really nice complementary pick for a young developmental post alongside Christian Wood, because he's a high motor, kind of defensive-minded motor guy next to Christian Wood, who's obviously kind of like a hybrid big offensive savant type post. So they would work really well together, in my opinion. And he, he's young. I mean, he's a true freshman that contributed at a high level in a tough situation where he had to share a lot of minutes at Carolina. And I think he's absolutely a top 25 prospect in this draft class. And I think you've done a good job. I think the Rockets fans would hopefully be pretty happy with this haul right here.
I mean, that's what I try to make everyone happy. I look at it from a long-term perspective as well. And I'm thinking too, if you could sport a at worst, a top five that looks like Jalen Suggs, Kevin Porter Jr. You throw out Josh Christopher, you have Christian Wood, and now you're adding Deron Sharp. Like that might be like a G League darling right there for at least the first maybe 2 seasons, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Well, cool. So now we can roll into the Los Angeles Clippers, and again, this is a team that there's rumors will Kawhi, won't Kawhi. Are there going to be sweeping changes in free agency, things of that nature? Can we expect like a Luke Kennard possibly to be dealt? A whole lot of possibilities here, but we're going to stick with what we got right now. With the 25th pick, look, it's no secret that the Clippers are in the market for a point guard here, right? So we look at some of the point guards that were already taken. There's really not a lot of other ones left that people are kind of high on. So, and look, this is a prospect that a lot of people just seem to be kind of down on lately.
Uh-huh.
But the thing is that this draft is so deeply that even though he's not as high as some of these others, look, he could come in to the Clippers and do a great job. That being Sharif Cooper, the young man out of Auburn, a little undersized at 6 foot maybe, also 165 pounds maybe, but his ability to move the ball, whip it around, to score, the confidence that he has, I feel like his attitude kind of fits this Clippers roster as well. I think it's kind of a hand in glove fit, but I'm interested to hear your perspective on that, Lee.
Yeah, so I am also probably a little lower on Sharif Cooper than the consensus, but when you start to get into this kind of mid-20s back into the first round is where I think his value starts to make a ton of sense. I got to ask, who did you take for New York at 19?
So I took Trey Mann to be their guard there, which the defensive versatility, the pure shooting that he gives, the size, he kind of fits. I think that he can play next to Quickly in a cool little backcourt lineup there.
So okay, perfect. Because I was curious, like if you hadn't taken a guy like Trey Mann, who I love, like I think Trey Mann's like a top 15 to 18 prospect in this draft. I would have said that I love the Sharif Cooper pick in New York, but Trey Mann makes a ton of sense to me. This is another fit that I really like for Sharif Cooper. There's only a couple places that I would be like super encouraged about him going, and LA and New York are two of the highest on those lists because it would allow him to be in a situation where you would hope that his inability right now to shoot the basketball wouldn't alienate him as much as it would in some other places. Obviously, he's probably the best passer in this draft cycle. He's maybe the best lob thrower prospect that I've ever seen, ever. Like, with both hands just makes incredibly tough. Like, they look easy to a casual fan. It's like, oh, like he just threw this little lob pass with his left hand across the lane to, the perfect spot for his guy to dunk it through. But like, those are incredibly difficult passes to make. He is a sensational high lob passer, which can be really valuable in the NBA. The shooting concerns me. The defense concerns me. And the fact that he kind of used, and like, he's not a huge guy, but he's pretty bulky and he's feisty. And I think he used I know this sounds counterintuitive because people think of him as a small guy, but like he used bully ball at times to get to the basket and just kind of overpowered and overwhelmed college guards, which I don't know that he's going to be able to do that at the NBA level. He is really good at like absorbing contact and hanging around the rim and finishing and things of that nature. I just really worry about like his point of attack defense, his shooting, and how that will affect like his ultimate like value add profile. That being said, at 25, I'm totally cool with it. Once you get to the back half of this second round, particularly when some of these other guards are already off the board, I think it makes a ton of sense in LA, who, like you said, is in the market for a creator.
Yeah, and I think too that the defensive liability that he could potentially be. One, we've seen Lou Williams thrive in this system. Not necessarily the best 3-point shooter. Not saying he's a poor one, right? But he's not what I would consider to be like a plus 3-point shooter on this team, or even necessarily a passer, but his lack of defense definitely was taken advantage of at moments. But the Clippers ultimately, I think when you look at compared to other teams, that they were able to kind of mitigate whatever defensive liabilities that he were up until like the playoffs, if that makes sense. But as a rookie, most rookies are going to struggle defensively anyway. So if you can draft a guy that can whip the ball around, can help alleviate, Kawhi Leonard and Paul George having to become more playmakers than they are finishers, I think that kind of helps the Clippers further down the line. All right, Lee. So now we're going to go up to pick 26. The Denver Nuggets are on the clock. And you know what, man? Denver, they do a pretty good job of drafting players that they like and that fit their system, and they put them in. Now, every once in a while, you can kind of get your exceptions to this rule. But by and large, when Denver drafts somebody, they typically make it into their rotation. So when I look at Denver, Jamal Murray coming in off of an injury, I feel like they could go that route, but I don't know with all of the guards that have been taken so far, if at 26, you're kind of looking to address that need. So maybe you kind of fill out your other backcourt rotation spot, maybe your 2. This guy maybe even get you minutes at the 3, depending on the matchup that you're in. And that being Jaden Springer, the young man out of Tennessee, 6'4", about 205 pounds. Another one of these just great athletes in the SEC. You're kind of an athlete first and then a basketball player second sometimes, depending on the team. I think Jaden Springer comes in defensively. He's there. Slashing wise, he's there. He kind of makes, some of the other players that haven't been able to do so much on this team so far a little bit more expendable. And I think that it's a pretty decent fit, but I'm interested to see where you have Jaden Springer here.
Yeah, so definitely probably one of my hottest takes of this draft cycle. I think outside of Jalen Suggs and Jalen Green, who I do think are clearly superior guard prospects to Jaden Springer, I think he's the 3rd best guard in this entire draft.
Okay.
I've got Jaden Springer in the lottery. I realize that's a minority opinion, but I see how young he is, number one. One of the youngest players in this draft class. On ball, actually, he's the 4th youngest player in this draft class.
Yep.
On the ball, just a complete brick house on the ball defender. And for a kid who's 18 years old, like that is only going to compound upon itself with improvement and value. I mean, we see how we see a guy like Drew Holiday who just won a title as pretty much the 3rd option, as a guy who you almost forget that he exists offensively at times, but he's such an incredible on the ball defender that he's that valuable, and he makes a difference for a team that couldn't win a title without him, that now has just won one with him. I think Jaden Springer, maybe he's never like an all NBA defender, but I think he's got massive defensive upside. He was also an incredibly efficient shooter at Tennessee. Now, he was a very judicious shooter. Like he didn't take a ton of volume. He wasn't in the pick and roll a ton because Tennessee didn't run the pick and roll a lot. And if they did, they had Vescovi, who's an international college guard that's got some nice like facilitation on the ball creation, is a little bit more experienced than Springer at this point. So we haven't really seen him in like a spread heavy pick and roll type situation, but a guy that can turn the corner and get downhill, handles the ball incredibly adeptly, shows some facilitation flashes, and can really shoot it. And he's just like the premier body type to be a solid NBA point guard. So I mean, shoot, if Denver gets him at 26, like run to the podium. You know what I mean? So like, yep. I love Jaden Springer. I love the fit in Denver. I just think he should go way, way higher.
Yeah, and that's fair. And when I'm looking at him, I don't know if the handle translates all that well. I don't know if the shooting is real. I know that the defense is going to be there, right? But I don't know if I go like a potentially like an all, maybe not even an all NBA level defender, but like a really good one, that high. But I certainly get where people, and the age, right? Like that's the big thing. I think that a lot of people, they look at and say, look, this kid is still trying to figure out the game of basketball and is already doing a great job right now. If you're a training staff like a Denver, you're like, we can work with this kid, and everything hits well, he's gonna have a successful NBA career.
Yeah, just for context, it's Primo, Kuminga, Giddey, Springer in that order as the youngest draft prospects, and then JT Thor would be 5th.
Yeah, there's a lot of really tantalizing young prospects in this draft, man. It's a deep draft. There's a lot to be excited about. And it's one of these drafts where like I wish I can have 20 dudes in my top 10,
Totally,
or
totally.
60 in my top 30.
Yeah, there's going to be really good players drafted in the second round, in my opinion, in this draft for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. Now let's transition to a guy who a lot of people kind of have in their kind of high second round draft range, maybe to late first. I'm pretty high on the kid, but the Brooklyn Nets are on the clock here, and these draft picks they have to do something with them. If they keep them, they got to hit, and if they trade them, they got to bring in a ready to win now rotational player. I think though, if they go with a pretty interesting route here, and Philippe Petrusev, the international big man coming in. He's about 6'11", 235. Profiles right now, I think, is a really good catch and shoot big man, a pick and pop guy. And look, you could do a lot with a Kyrie Irving, a James Harden, or Kevin Durant pick and roll with a player like this, whether he's involved with it or just as a spot up threat. The upside, obviously, I think is there with him. Went to Gonzaga for a little bit. It was like, nah, this ain't for me. Let me go back to playing international basketball. So one, if he's good enough to be a Gonzaga big man, that that he's got talent already at the collegiate level. And then internationally, he just did nothing but display that. So one, where are you at with him overall as a prospect? And what do you think of the potential of him being a Brooklyn Net, Lee?
Yeah, well, Flip's really interesting because, like you said, he was at Gonzaga last season, could have came back, chose not to, went to play in the Adriatic League overseas, and if I'm not mistaken, I believe he was the MVP of the
Yes,
Adriatic League.
he was. Yep.
Yeah. So, and one of the more interesting, I think, kind of like player development stories in this draft right now is Flip, who was not much of a floor stretcher at all at Gonzaga, really shot the ball well for KK Mega. So, um, like that's just really interesting because, as you said, like if he's a true like floor stretch pick and pop guy, I think that's a lot more interesting than the Gonzaga profile we saw last year, which was an impressive low post scorer. But like, how valuable is that profile in today's NBA if you're not much of a rim protector and you can't space the floor? So the fact that he's now showing the ability to shoot makes him a bit more tantalizing, in my opinion. I guess I'm a little more, which is uncommon for me, but I guess I'm more with the consensus on this one is like second round pick for me. But at the end of the day, like Brooklyn needs floor spacing, and they need pick and pop, and they need off. And I mean, they have tons of offensive talent, but they need ancillary offensive talent to allow their stars to do what they do. So, I could see it. It doesn't seem ridiculous to me by any means. I'm just a bit lower on Flip, I think, than this it right here.
And that's perfectly fine. I appreciate you, keeping the kid gloves on, so to speak, with saying that you're not so high on him, but you certainly see the fit aspect of it. That means a lot, Lee. You're too good to me, man. I appreciate it.
And look, seriously though, like in all seriousness, like his shooting development, I think, is one of the under discussed player development storylines of this draft because he didn't do it at all last year, and he's like filling it up from deep. And by the way, the Adriatic League is one of the better overseas professional leagues and has produced a ton of NBA guys. So it's not like he's playing, with the Sisters of the Blind over there. That's a really good league.
Yeah, absolutely. And I like him a lot as a prospect, and I could see Brooklyn maybe looking at keeping him as a kind of like a developmental guy, but also a guy who could come in and just give you really good minutes as a floor spacer and keeping those driving lanes open for a James Harden, Kyrie Irving, or Kevin Durant. All right, so from one interesting prospect to another, I feel like we're kind of getting into that realm of interesting prospects this late in the draft here, Lee. The Philadelphia 76ers are on the clock. A lot of rumors on will they get a Bradley Beal? Will they get a Damian Lillard? Who's available to be had? I think they have one of the best interesting trade packages out of any other NBA team with a Tyrese Maxey, a Matisse Thybulle, a Ben Simmons, and draft picks. But this isn't that type of show. They're drafting where they're at right here at pick 28. And I'm kind of projecting a little bit, though, that Ben Simmons won't be there with this pick. And I have them taking Jason Preston out of Ohio. Really, had a great tournament, I will say. Had a really good season, a strong season. Another one of these guys, like I comp to Bones Highland, where he has a knack for just making tough shots. can handle the ball, can play off of it as well. I don't think that he's going to come in and demand to take the ball out of Joel Embiid's hands, or even a Tobias Harris if Doc Rivers wants to keep using him as that second option there. But I think Preston gives a lot of promise to a Philadelphia 76ers team as a kind of combo guard coming in. What do you think?
Yeah, Preston's an interesting prospect. I kind of have described him as like a Tyrese Halliburton light. Like, he's not nearly the efficient shooter that Halliburton is. He's not, and he also doesn't have the kind of like innate defensive instincts that a guy like Halliburton does, which is part of the reason why you and me both loved Halliburton last
Absolutely.
cycle. So he's missing some of the qualities that made Halliburton, like, for me, this very complete prospect. But what he does do is he's 6'6", 6'7", and he's got, I mean, behind Cooper, he might be the second best passer in this draft. Just a real impressive ability from an IQ perspective to spray the ball all over the court, see guys out of the back of his head, create easy opportunities for his teammates in like advantage creation in transition or off the pick and roll or getting downhill in half court offense. So he would be an interesting kind of like young backcourt complement to a guy like Tyrese Maxey, who's more of a slashing, score first, explosive guard, where Preston's more of a facilitator, pass first kind of guy. I think shooting's going to be a huge swing skill for Preston. If he can stretch the floor effectively, that's going to make him a lot more valuable, particularly on offense. If teams can kind of help off of and sag off of him, I think that takes away and like it kind of locks up the creativeness that he has. But in transition, he's fantastic. And he's, like I said, he's one of the best passers in this draft class. I've got Preston as a second round pick, but as you get like at the back half late in this first round, this is where things get wild. And I love what you said earlier. Like, this is the part of the draft that guys like us love. It's like, yeah, sure. Like, the lottery's awesome. There's going to be incredible prospects. It's fun. But this is where the nerds really get to shine through.
Yep.
And like, these are the guys I really like talking about, honestly.
Yeah, this is where the homework comes into play. You
Exactly.
know, you can watch a 15-minute ESPN special on a Cade Cunningham and be like, okay, this guy's going to be good at basketball because he's good at basketball. Now we're getting into like, okay, this guy really showed the ability to pass the ball at this level. You just mentioned, you know, he's got a swing skill. You know, how does that project? What team is going to be interested on taking a chance on a guy like that? You know, he's a second rounder, but he could live up to being a first round type of guy down the line. I love this, man. And that's why I was super excited whenever you said, yeah, I'll do the back half of the draft for you, Steven. So I appreciate that, Lee.
Oh, man. Always here, brother. And I think you sell yourself short sometimes, man. Like, you were super high on Halliburton. You were super high on Jaden McDaniels, who turned out to be a steal of the first round. So I appreciate your humility, but you had some really good calls last year too, man.
And I appreciate that. Yeah, I'm still waiting for that Jaden McDaniels just to take. I'm still waiting for Cassius Winston to get some playing time this season, and in Washington too. But yeah, McDaniels was my fourth overall prospect.
Right.
No big deal. But
exactly.
You know. All right, Lee. So we're in pick 29. I'm not going to call them losers because they made it to the NBA Finals. You can't be a loser and make it to the finals, right? We'll just call them the less unfortunate of the two teams here. The Phoenix Suns are on the clock. And just to kind of give you an idea of the angle that I went here, one, I just really like this prospect overall. I think that any team that's looking for a winning now type rookie to come in and make a difference, he makes sense. But particularly with Phoenix, we've seen the way that they draft players. They have kind of a style or a profile that you like to say, Lee. I've been borrowing that word from you. I love that word profile with these prospects now. They have a particular profile that they're looking for at these young players, and age really isn't a concern. You know, it doesn't matter that they may not ever develop into a big home run hit as far as just overall scoring the ball, but they understand their role. They're unselfish, and they could come in and do something for your team day one, and they're hard workers. So with that being said, Phoenix is on the clock. I have them taking Joel Ayayi, you know, the young kind of guard forward, depending on who you're playing against, right? Out of Gonzaga, I really love the fact that he does all the dirty work for the team. He doesn't care that he wasn't that highly praised as far as national media goes because his team recognized how important he was. He was rewarded in the WCC tournament as being the MVP in that bad boy. So he did a really great job this season as just playing alongside guys that he knew were going to get drafted ahead of him, behind him, taking away a little bit of shine from him overall as a prospect. But I think that Phoenix would do extremely well to land a Joel Ayayi here. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I think you're dead on with the profile. Like, particularly, I mean, I think most people are probably expecting Chris Paul to be back in Phoenix, although there's still a little bit maybe of a question there. I think where this makes a ton of sense is the fact that Cam Payne may not be able to be retained in Phoenix, and he was obviously like a super important backup kind of creation guard for the Phoenix Suns. Ayayi is really interesting because like you said, he had just some incredibly important moments for Gonzaga, not only in their conference tournament but also in the NCAA tournament. He's a guy who was super efficient from the field, had a positive assist to turnover ratio. Seems like he, obviously I think his size will probably limit his ultimate upside as a defender, but he seems like a guy who's really cerebral, like he knows where to be. He rotates well. He's like adequate on the ball. I don't think he's like an incredible on the ball defender, but he's solid. So for Phoenix, like you said, a team that's like they were up 2-0 in this NBA Finals, like before losing 4 in a row, and just Giannis having maybe one of the greatest NBA Finals performances of all time. So look, 2 weeks ago, we were all like pretty sure that CP3 was going to be having his parade. And then Giannis said, no, sir, that's not going to be happening this year. So I think Phoenix is, to your point, they're going to be trying to improve this roster now. And if a guy like Ayayi can maybe provide, I don't know, 85 to 90% of what Cam Payne was able to provide at a lot cheaper of a rate, obviously, maybe that's something they would heavily consider. I think I'm more partial to a couple other guards that could come in and help right away. But from a fit standpoint, this totally makes sense to me. Like, this could absolutely happen on draft night. But if you don't mind, I know.
No, please.
I'm the guest who should be providing my opinions, and I know you already talked about him a little bit, but can you sell me a little more on Ayayi and like what to you kind of, I guess maybe for all the reasons I just pointed out, but like what makes him like a surefire first round prospect for you?
So I think you have to well, first off, I think that he has a lot of skills that do translate. I think that his defense is going to translate, particularly when you look at how there's really not a lot of just true stoppers in the NBA anymore anyway. And the ones that are, they stand out. But I think that we've seen him compete in a scheme with, Coach Few that you just spoke about. And I think that you can look at that and you say, look, he played next to other NBA talented level talent players and filled his role very well. So if we're a winning team and we want to continue to build, we know that we can plug him in next to Devin Booker, who we just saw actually stepped up his defensive intensity in the playoffs a lot. And I don't think that that's a story that's getting spoke about either. He can fit next to a Cam Johnson. He can fit next to a Mikal Bridges. He's kind of one of these plug and play dudes that Phoenix just loves. And I think there's a lot of teams that are looking more at these kind of plug and play athletes. Much like we spoke about with Suggs, there's that comment to where like, okay, he played next to other really good talent. How is that a knock against him? You and I, we don't view it that way. As a matter of fact, I look at that and say, we know that he can play next to really good players and still have a very solid role for himself coming in. So to me, a back half of the first round, I think that fits a Joel Ayayi. I love his ability to be kind of like a secondary or even tertiary playmaker coming in with a Chris Paul or a Cam Payne, whoever's there, and a Devin Booker. I think that he makes life a little bit easier for them because one of the things that they needed was just another playmaker. In my finals analysis between Milwaukee and Phoenix, the reason I picked Milwaukee was just the simple fact that the number 3 is bigger than the number 2. They had 3 guys that can create for others, and Phoenix only had 2. There's a lot of teams that need that third style playmaker. I think Joel, he can guard the 1-2, and again, depending on the lineup, maybe even the 3. He can play make. He rebounds tremendously well for a guard too, which we saw Pat Connaughton for Milwaukee have a very solid role for that team as an offensive rebounder and a hustle player. I think that Joel, he just has that winning makeup that teams are looking for desperately now, especially with how deep this draft is, and where some of these teams that are even in the early 20s, like in Atlanta, I think would be more than happy to have a Joel Ayayi. Maybe not day one, but I think as we look at how his career projects out, that he will that he is going to be a solid role player, like maybe a 7th or an 8th man on a team. And when you're picking late in the first round, that's what you want.
Oh, you sold me, man. You sold me.
I appreciate it.
That was a good breakdown. That was a really good breakdown. That was literally exactly what I was looking for. Because honestly, Ayayi's been a tough one for me to peg. Like, and obviously I'll be battening down the hatches on my ranges and finally putting final numbers on these guys. But like, he's one of those guys that I wouldn't be shocked to see him go 25th, and I wouldn't be shocked to see him go 45th. Like, it just seems like there's a lot of variance with where he could go. But Phoenix, I think that's one to watch for NBA draft fans that are going to be, having a pizza and some beer on Thursday night. Watch that Phoenix pick, because for all the reasons you just laid out, there's a lot to be said about the theory with Ayayi there in that backcourt.
Yeah, I could even see him go to the team that's got the next pick, but since he's not on the board, I'm going to go with the guy that, look, Lee, just to be honest with you, he's climbing up draft boards a lot, and I understand why, and I can understand why why teams would like his ability to come in and contribute as a day one guy, which is why I have him as a first round draft pick still, even though I'm not that high on him. But Chris Duarte coming in, the Utah Jazz selecting him with the last pick in the first round. I'm not quite sure where you fall with the whole Chris Duarte creeping up into the top 20 of the draft discussion that has been kind of all over social media lately. How do you evaluate Chris Duarte coming into the NBA League?
Yeah, so I do love Chris Duarte.
Okay.
So a couple different things I'll lay out for a case for him. 144 three-pointers made on the season. And he made those at a 42% clip. So that's massive volume. That's not a guy like that's the opposite of a guy like Springer, who only took 1 or 2 a game, but shot a really good percentage. So it's a little harder to project how real the shooting is. With Duarte, this guy was taking 5 to 6 threes a game. He's making 42% of those threes. He led the Pac-12 in three-pointers made. He also led the Pac-12 in steals, total steals. So averaged almost 2 steals a game. Big-time defensive anticipation. Good size, 6'6", combo, kind of hybrid guard wing, spaces the floor, solid defender, good size. Like, that's a nice little kind of baseline profile, I think, for a guy who can come in the NBA and help right away. Now, counterpoints. He's ancient. We know that. Like, Duarte is...
He can't get better anymore. He's done as a player. He's done developing, right?
Right, of course, yeah, of course. He can't get better. No
tongue in cheek, obviously.
Yeah, I know. He is not necessarily the oldest prospect in this draft, but he is the oldest prospect in this draft that will likely actually be drafted. And by a pretty big margin. I mean, the next guy that could be drafted would be like, Sam Hauser's 23 and a half, Jay Huff's 23 and a half. And Duarte is 24 and 2 months old. He's older than Malik Monk, Stephen.
That's insane.
That breaks your
Malik's
brain.
been in the league like what, 6 years now or something?
Malik Monk was coached by Steve Clifford in Charlotte.
Yes.
That's how old. That's how long he's been in the league. And Chris Duarte is older than him.
That is so nuts, man.
Yeah, like when I realized that, I think it was Brian Geisinger from ACCSports.com and BuzzBeat that told me that, and I was just like, I don't believe that. And I looked it up. And it's
inconceivable.
Like, oh my God, Duarte is absolutely older than Malik Monk. Also, he's not like you got to really watch him to know the profile. And I think he's kind of perceived as like an on the ball creator. He is for himself, but not really for others. Like,
Yeah.
he's got a nice ability to, hesitate and go. He's got all the step backs and crossover, pull back, jump shot stuff. Like, all that's there, but he's not going to put, an offense on his back as an on the ball creator and create shots for others. That's not really what he's great at. He can a little bit, but that's not what he is. Duarte is big time shot maker, solid size on the wing or at the guard, can give you defensive versatility in the backcourt, and he's a better athlete, and a better defender with defensive anticipation, getting into the passing lanes. Like, he'll take the ball from you if you're a mediocre ball handler and you put it out in front of him, he'll just take it from you.
Yep.
So I guess I understand the drawbacks, the age and the creation for others is not what he's great at. I just find it really hard to believe that 3 years into this draft class, Duarte won't be returning like top 20 value in this class. I just think he's going to contribute early and often. And as we know, and I talk about this all the time, as draft pontificators, and I'm guilty of it myself, like, we always think there's going to be 35 to 40 guys from each draft class that make it. And that's just historically, that's just not the case. It's going to be like 22. It's going to be like, in a great class, you might have 25 guys that become second contract players. So we have to try and parse out and pick through which guys are actually going to make it. And I think Duarte is one of those guys. I think he's actually going to make it, which puts him in the top 20 to 25 in this class, in my opinion. But I know he's gonna be 30 years old like tomorrow. So it's tough.
Yeah, he may not be. He may. There's a joke that I almost made, but I think it'll be in poor taste.
And last thing though, Utah, love the fit.
Yeah.
Like, they need shot making off their bench. They've relied on basically Jordan Clarkson and kind of whoever else, Niang, like whoever else can kind of get in there and maybe make a shot here or there. Like,
O'Neal,
they need depth and they need shooting, and Duarte would provide that immediately. So it's an awesome fit pick.
Yeah, and I think too that the defensive side is there too. Another guy that can defend multiple positions. We just saw Utah have a great season with that kind of switchability on defense and the ability to hit down the three. The biggest concern for me is the dribble game, and if you're in the backcourt and the ball handling is kind of not really there, that's the one thing that kind of concerns me there, Lee. But other than that, I think that he's a fine prospect. And again, I think that this is a guy that you look at and you kind of just want to hope that he finds his way into what you're saying. And again, there's like 60 dudes I wish I could put into the first round in this year's draft, right? So, Lee, that closes out our first round. And I just want to let everyone know that support for Breaking the Game is brought to you by Manscaped. Go over to manscaped.com, enter in promo code BTG at checkout. That'll let you know that I'm sent you. And because I'm such good friends with the folks over at Manscaped, they'll give you a 20% discount and free worldwide shipping. And Lee, we're kind of coming up against it for the radio segment. So what we're going to do now is we're going to close out here. I just got a couple more questions for you for the podcast portion. We're going to get into players that you're higher on, lower on, maybe in a couple second round gems, because I know that you're shopping for those as well. So please go over to anywhere you get your podcast, look up Breaking the Game, like, share, subscribe, rate, and review. But before we close out, Lee, obviously just thank you so much for your time, man. Why don't you go ahead and let the folks know where they can find you?
Yeah, at Which Carolina, spelled just like it sounds on Twitter. Which Carolina podcast, doing a ton of NBA draft stuff, and then of course we're covering the Charlotte Hornets as well. Find that podcast on any streaming platform. We've been growing pretty significantly each month, and then you'll see some of my written content at hoopsprospects.com for the NBA draft. So thanks so much, Steven. I appreciate you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for our great guest, Lee Branscome of the Which Carolina podcast and hoopsprospects.com, for myself, for the Off the Ball Network, which is where I contribute, you can go online right now and look up my complete first and second round mock drafts based off of where I think these guys are going to project long term. So please go to offtheballnetwork.com. You can check out that first and second round draft that I have up there. We have a lot of other great material up there as well. My buddy Kenneth from the Shoot or Shoot podcast, he has an excellent series of the NBA draft as well. You can go over and check all that stuff out. And if you're listening to us on the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, please don't go anywhere. My buddy Mo is going to be coming on next for Off the Ball Mondays. And then following him, we have Chris LeBron. And then later tonight, the Hoopers podcast is going to be up as well. So stay tuned for the rest of Off the Ball Mondays. I just want to thank everyone so much for your support on behalf of Breaking the Game, the Nothing But Net channel here on Dash Radio. This has been Breaking the Game. We'll catch up with y'all next time. Much love, everybody. All right, Lee. So now we're back. We're continuing on with the podcast here. For everyone who's just tuning in, Lee had the pleasure of having him come on and kind of dissect my 20 through 30 range of my NBA mock draft. And he's given us great insight and analysis on where he thinks these prospects are going to pan out long term. But we're not done, because I want to ask Lee a few questions, starting off with, Lee, overall in this draft process, you can either pick with the guys that we went over now. You can go over the draft entirely, where you have guys in the first or the second, however you want to do this. Who are just some prospects that you're not so high on? And then who are some prospects that you're higher on than the general consensus?
Yeah, so a couple guys come to mind that I'm not super high on. Daisha Nix with the G League Ignite is a guard that and it's funny because like this is actually kind of the profile of guard that I might be kind of biased towards liking a little bit too much. Like he's kind of an old school true point guard, really deliberate in kind of the way he plays. He's not a bursty guy like you and me will remember, but younger listeners might not remember a guy like Andre Miller in the NBA.
Oh, yeah.
Just like played at his own pace, never sped up. But like Andre Miller, I mean, he had like a couple 50-point games in his career. So again, like this is, an instinctual, cerebral, physical point guard is a guy that I normally like, but like I just don't see it with Daisha Nix. He's below average as a shooter, doesn't really separate off the dribble. He's a solid passer, but I don't see him as like an above average or like, instinctual, like awesome passer. Can't really score, gets blown by on defense. I'd love to be wrong about him because I do love seeing guys like this succeed. I don't think he's a draftable prospect. And I think a lot of people, I mean, I've even seen some people with him like in their late first round. But not a big believer in Daisha Nix, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I have him, just to be upfront with you. If you go to offtheballnetwork.com, I have my second round mock draft up. Not going to be doing a full breakdown of that here for Breaking the Game on the radio or the podcast, but if you're interested, it is available, and I did do my homework on it. I have Daisha Nix 44th right now to the Brooklyn Nets, due to the fact that sometimes their guards just aren't available, whether that be to personal reasons or injuries, what have you. He's still very young. I like the ability to be able to come in and continue to improve. Lee, I want to ask you this. I asked this with my previous guests that I've had on for the draft. I'm kind of more on the lenient side with these G League prospects because, one, it's its inaugural season. We've never seen anything like it. Daisha Nix is playing alongside about 4 or 5 other prospects that may or may not get drafted. And he's going up against grown men that are fighting for a paycheck. You know what I mean? I think that that's how I evaluate it. I'm curious to see what's your approach been like with evaluating G League prospects.
No, I think that's true, Stephen. Like, I think you do have to contextualize the fact that these guys are playing against better competition, just straight up. I mean, these are borderline fringe or even former NBA players, grown men. Like you said, these are 25, 28, 30-year-old guys who are professional basketball players that have made a living doing this for sometimes a decade. I also, though, on the flip side, I also think that gives you a more clear context on how their game might translate to the NBA level because they're already playing at a competition level that obviously it's not the NBA, it's not the big show, but it's a bit more synonymous with
Mhm.
the NBA competition, the speed, the spread pick and roll, heavy action, like
The
so
coaching too.
the
There's even good
coaching,
coaching.
the rotation, like all of that. Like, so I think it cuts both ways a little bit. I think one, you have to contextualize it and realize that these are teenagers
Mhm.
playing at a higher level of competition. But I think you also have to consider that if they're showing flaws or struggles, that those are real struggles, and those may you may be able to glean some context about their potential exposures at the NBA level too. So it's a little bit of a give and take for me. But I have loved like it's awesome to get to watch
Oh,
four
yeah.
prospects at one time. Not to mention you get to watch some of the other you get to watch some of the guys who are in the G League from last cycle. Like I was watching earlier today, I was watching Ignite versus Oklahoma City, and I get to catch some Poku action. So
Yeah.
like it's awesome. But but yeah, that's where I'm at with Knicks. But it's a great point, and it's an interesting like theoretical conversation, because this we're going to be evaluating G League Ignite guys presumably from now until forever, probably. Like this program, I think, and even in a weird year, I think you could say it was a success for these guys for the most part.
Yeah, and that's a fair point. That's why I wanted to ask you that question, because the way that I'm looking at it, is based off of the way that I'm perceiving it. But the feedback that you just gave me gives me another wrinkle that I need to consider when I'm evaluating a league that we've never even seen before. So we got to figure out, like, okay, how do we adequately appraise a player's value based off of this brand new upstart league, right?
And I will say, after I kind of like tore him apart, 2 points in his favor. Number one, it looks like he's lost a ton of weight
Mm-hmm.
since the G League season to now, and it's always I don't try to take too much away from like shooting workouts, but it does seem like his form has been cleaned up a little bit
Yeah.
more efficient, quicker release, kind of like more compact, less room for error in there. So to offer a couple counterpoints, I could see how people are kind of talking themselves into a new and improved and slimmer Daisha Nix, because, part of the reason why I'm not as high on him is because I don't see his ability to separate. But if he's a bit sleeker and all of a sudden he can start turning the corner on guys, well, that changes the calculus a little bit, because then his passing vision gets opened up a bit. His
Mm-hmm.
ability to kind of hold guys off and finish around the rim with his physicality improves a bit. So, again, I've said my piece on him, but I wanted to kind of offer a couple counterpoints as well.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's totally respect where you're coming from with Deshaun. He's been one of the more intriguing prospects,
Yeah.
to put it politically speaking, that I've evaluated. But I can kind of talk myself into the upside of a guy like Deshaun. But who else do you have on here, Lee? Guys that you're maybe higher on than the consensus, or maybe lower?
I'll give you one more lower, and I don't think this is and maybe you're a bit higher on this guy. I'm not sure, but I just have not been able to talk myself into Greg Brown from Texas at all.
Okay.
Mostly, and to be fair, this can be a bias of mine, but like I just think his feel and his basketball IQ are really, really low.
Mm-hmm.
Misses open guys, doesn't rotate on defense, gets back cut, is lost kind of from a rotational standpoint. Now, you could say like almost all players are lost defensively, especially as rookies and young players.
Yep.
And he's a tremendous athlete, big time athlete. And he does show glimpses of potentially being able to stretch the floor at some
Yep.
point in his career. And that, if that happens, I think that changes his abilities. There's defensive upside there, but man, he's just a mess from like a feel and an IQ standpoint. And again, that's a personal bias of mine. I like players that know that are a bit more advanced in kind of their feel of the game. And this is another guy, a huge variance on. Like, some guys think he should go undrafted. Some guys still have him kind of in the top 20, 25. So, I can understand how people would get one way or another on him. I'm just kind of leaning on that side of, I don't think Greg Brown ever figures it out.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, and I have him mocked right now, 33rd overall to Orlando. Another Texas big man with a little bit of question marks as to how he's going to pan out. That's what they need, in my
That's right.
opinion, in Orlando.
That's what Orlando loves, so they'll go
They
for it.
love it. They love it. All right, Lee. How about a couple guys that that people are maybe sleeping on, in your opinion?
Yeah, well, I mean, he's been my guy this whole draft cycle. He's my Emmanuel Quickly of this draft cycle.
Love me some Emmanuel last year too, man.
Miles McBride from West Virginia.
I know that you're really big on Miles.
I gotta always get in my little McBride rant. Obviously, point guard, sophomore from University of West Virginia. Arguably, probably not arguably top 3 defender in this draft class. I would argue he might be the best on-ball defender in this draft class. Way better athlete than he gets credit for. Big time, like just multivariant basketball functional athlete. Sees plays before they happen, defensive anticipation, facilitates really well. Where I think he's really valuable. And this was also true of Quickly. And they're different players, don't get me wrong, but they do both offer this specific skill set. Miles McBride at the NBA level, in my opinion, will be able to, in a pinch, kind of be an offensive creator in the pick and roll, because he did that a ton at West Virginia. Maybe in a second unit, he can kind of lead your offense in a second unit, particularly early in his career. Or he can also be like a second side creator. Ball reversal into a pick and roll, ball reversal into attacking a closeout, that type of stuff. So my point is, he can be an on the ball creator when he needs to be, as a secondary or tertiary option on the second side, or as a primary creator in a second unit against another bench point guard. But he can also play alongside of like primary creation engines, because he can space the floor. Miles McBride is a terrific pull-up jump shot shooter. He's a very, very serviceable three-point floor stretcher as well. So just like Emmanuel Quickly, he can provide offensive creation and on the ball stuff in a pinch or when you need him to with the second unit, but he can also space the floor with a primary creation guy depending on where he goes. He's a fantastic on the ball defender. He's an awesome athlete. He's an instinctual, field-driven IQ point guard. I'm a sucker for these guys. I think he's going to outperform his draft status by a long shot.
Yeah, and just to be upfront and honest with you, please don't hate me. I have him 38th right now. Right. Just the guard depth in general of this draft class is phenomenal, and that's what makes evaluating a guy like an Evan Mobley even, like, how good is he going to be compared to other positions? Like, obviously as a big man, like, he's far and away the best right now. Shout out to my guy Alperen Şengün. I'm holding out a lot of hope for Şengün too, but the guard depth overall, whether it be your traditional point guard style, a combo guard, a hybrid guard, a true off guard, just there's so many different types of guards that it's really hard to evaluate the pecking order, at least in my humble opinion, where these guys are going to pan out amongst their contemporaries in this draft, Lee.
No, it is. I mean, look, you just rattle off some of the guards that could be considered at least kind of in the same range. I mean, you start with Springer and Butler and Mitchell and McBride and Mann and DeSumo and Christopher and Duarte and Cooper, and it's like, just it's your taste, it's your preference. Like, it's really hard to split the hairs between those kind of late lottery all the way to late first round guard profiles and trying to sift through them and figure out which ones are going to be the best. I mean, it was the same thing last year, trying to figure out between a guy like Winston and Pritchard and all those Quickly, Maxey, all of those guys last year, trying to sift through which of these guards is going to be this. It's the toughest thing to do, I think, every year is try and pick out the best ones between those like mid first round guards. It's really hard to do.
Yeah, and then you got like your two guards, even like your Christophers or your Primos, where like teams are gonna look at them and be like, yeah, this guy can develop into a potential starter, maybe even better, or they could just swing the other way. We've seen that a number of times too. All right, Lee, what's one more that you got for a guy that you're higher on than the consensus? Or do you want? We can go more. I got all day. I have no family here at home. We can just hang out all day long.
I'll give you two.
Okay.
Number one, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Isaiah Jackson freshman from the University of Kentucky. Are
I
you
have him
locked in too?
11th. I have him 11th.
There we go. We found one. We found one we're on the same page with
Yes,
there.
sir.
Would love him in Charlotte. We'll see if that ends up happening. True freshman, University of Kentucky. Kentucky was a mess this year.
Yeah.
But
A lot
they
of
were
the blue blood college programs were.
exactly. And as much of a mess as they were this entire year, they were a disaster when Isaiah Jackson wasn't in the lineup. So the minutes when Isaiah Jackson played, they actually kind of like treaded water and were about comparable with their opponents. The minutes when Isaiah Jackson rested on the bench, Kentucky just got absolutely blasted.
Mm-hmm.
He led the SEC in total rebound percentage and total block percentage as a freshman. He's just a hyper athlete, like outside of area rebounder. And by that, I mean, like, you see a lot of these kind of like ground bound post players that they rebound the ball if it comes to them. Isaiah Jackson goes and gets rebounds, and that's like a super valuable thing. Big time rim roller, big time rim finisher, rim protector, super valuable archetype in today's NBA. And like slowly developing his touch on offense, shot 70% from the free throw line, which is not great, but is also not horrific. The shooting mechanics are not broken by any means. I think he just needs experience and reps. He started to show like a little bit of a kind of catch and shoot, middle of the lane jumper, a little face up jumper. So I'm just really, really bullish on him as like, at the very least, an awesome kind of rotational, defensive minded motor center. And then if some of the other ancillary stuff starts to take shape around his like core offering, then you're starting to look at like a starter level solid center in the NBA. And I mean, that's well worth a lottery pick in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think too, guys that are taken in about the range that where you and I value him coming out of the University of Kentucky, you hate to just say like, okay, well, this guy did this, so Jackson will too. But how many Kentucky players can we rattle off that were taken in that about 10 to 15 range from the University of Kentucky that got better as a pro because at Kentucky they weren't able to fully display their entire bag? Like how much is still there with Isaiah Jackson that he just couldn't display because of the teammates that he had around him, and he had to fit a particular role at the University of Kentucky.
Yeah, and exactly, and also, unfortunately, and it's not the kid's fault. It was a tough situation, but like they didn't have a real point guard. They did not have a real distributor this year. I wish Ashton Hagans would have stayed for one more year. He would have been one of the more impactful returnees. He would have completely changed like the makeup of that Kentucky team. So my point here is like I agree with that, and also he was able to make the contributions he made even without any type of a semblance of like a real facilitator. So get him at the NBA level, hint, with a guy like LaMelo Ball, and
one of the better facilitators already.
And let's see what he's able to do as a guy who can just catch and finish around the rim early in his career, offensive rebound, block shots. That's the path I see for Isaiah Jackson. And besides you and me, and actually my guy Rich over at Hoops Prospects is really high on him too. Us three are kind of the only guys I see like selling him as a true lottery pick. And I think he is absolutely a lottery pick in this draft.
Well, our Chris LeBron is really big on Isaiah Jackson as well. I mean, he's our guy. He's our guy. Yeah. So, Lee, you said you got one more dude that you wanted to bring up as far as guy that you're higher on than the consensus.
Yeah, I won't go JRE here because I know you love Robinson Earl too.
Love JRE.
Big on Robinson Earl. I'll give you one other name. This is a little bit more off the beaten path. Raekwon Gray from Florida State.
Yeah, I'm not there. Sell me on Raekwon.
Okay, so Raekwon, the reason I like Raekwon, and don't get me wrong, not as a top 25 guy, but I think at like back half of the first round, and then more than likely he's going to be kind of a early second round, mid second round pick. What's interesting about Raekwon Gray is kind of his defensive upside. I think that's the most tantalizing part of him. He probably needs to lose a little bit of weight, but like he's a guy when you look at the stock skills like steals and blocks, He's over 1 steal and over 1 block. And I'm always intrigued with defensive upside wings that offer that kind of versatility. Incredibly quick hands, nimble for his size, can guard multiple positions. Like probably at the NBA, like in college, he could guard 1 through 5. At the NBA level, it's probably more like 2, 2.5 to 4.5. I don't think he's going to be able to guard, obviously, the best centers in the game. And he's not going to be able to guard the most shiftiest point guards or necessarily like the high end elite shooting guards like
a Devin Booker.
Exactly. And who can really, but like,
correct.
but that's just going to be too much for him. But like, anything else, this guy can cover. He blocks shots. He has incredible defensive anticipation. He's a really good athlete. He finishes around the rim. So he is a swing. He's a reach. Don't get me wrong. He's not an efficient shooter right now, which is going to really probably hamper his value and ability to stay on the floor early in his career. But like, I just wouldn't be shocked if Raekwon Gray in 3 years ends up being like a really interesting glue guy for like a playoff team. And we look back and we're like, oh man, like how did this guy go late in the second round? He probably should have been more like a top 30 pick. So that's where I'm at with Raekwon. But I know he's an incomplete prospect. Don't get me wrong.
All right. So maybe he comes in as a Boris DL-esque type.
Yeah, I don't know if he passes it quite as well as DL, but yeah, there's something there. There's something there.
Okay, fair enough. All right, so Lee, before I let you go, and again, I just want to thank you so much for your time, man. I love having you on the program. You're one of my absolute favorite dudes as far as, well, just dude in general, but in particular, covering the draft as well.
Thanks, man.
The last time I had you on the show, I stumped you a little bit, and I was a little proud of myself because you're the one that stumps me normally. I gave you a name. Do you remember the name that I gave you?
I do remember the name you gave me. It was you're gonna have to help me pronounce it. Santiago Aldama.
Yep. So have you had a chance to look at any of him?
I have looked at Aldama, and our guy Rich over Hoops Prospect has him as a second round pick right now. So
I have him 50th to Philadelphia right now.
Yeah, Rich has got him 55th, so right in that range. I see him as a fringe second round pick as well. Like you said, like he was a guy I wasn't even aware of, and you made me aware of him, and I went and dug deep on him, and I like him a lot. I mean, talk about a guy who's, really, really skilled, right? Mm-hmm. Like that's kind of the calling card for him, I think. And wouldn't be shocked. I don't know. What do you think? Do you think he ends up getting picked?
So since I've been mentioning him, and I'm not going to take credit for him because obviously he's doing all the work himself, but I don't know. I've been seeing a lot of second round buzz on him from when I've been looking at him. I would love to see him go second round. I'm super high on his skill. I think that obviously being fit, me putting him 50th, there's a potential that he may not survive in the league or whatever, but I have an affinity for broken things, so to speak. Like I love looking at the back end of the draft. I love nerding out over like dudes that might not even be in the NBA, but he's just one of those guys, man, to where I watch this film. I look at the metrics that he possesses. I look
his
at
numbers are crazy.
The sheer numbers that he put. He's a 20-10 dude.
Yeah, and he has an NBA over a block a game too.
Yeah, he close to 2.
Close to 2.
Yeah, it was close to 2 blocks per game last season. And, he shot 35% from deep, and he was his team's best player. So I think that there's something there. I hope that he even proves me wrong where I have him. But I was just curious to see if you did any digging on my guy.
Brother. Oh, of course.
Right on. Well, Lee, man, I just want to say thank you so much. Anytime that our paths cross, man, it's always a good time. You're one of the best minds that I know as far as NBA prospect evaluation. I want to, again, give you an opportunity to share with the listeners who are coming over from Dash Radio, who may not have caught it, just where they may could find you and all the stuff that you have going on at your platforms.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's the feelings are mutual, and coming on here is one of my favorite things to do. The whole network is great, but particularly love interacting with you and Chris for sure. But yeah, at Which Carolina on Twitter. As obviously as the draft gets closer, I'll be putting out my final big board. I'll be doing a podcast on that big board. Find our Which Carolina podcast literally anywhere that you could possibly find podcasts. You'll be able to find us. And then I'll be writing some scouting reports for hoopsprospects.com this week as well. Start publishing some of those this week. So thanks again, Steven. I appreciate you, man.
Dude, absolutely. The pleasure has been all mine. All right, so the draft analysis is over. The pleasantries are over. We're going to get y'all out of here. Before we do, just want to remind everyone, go to manscaped.com and enter in promo code BTG on your purchase. We'll hook you up with a 20% discount and free shipping. And don't forget, too, that Off the Ball Network has been sponsored by MyBookie. They match up to 50% of your first deposit and up to $1,000 in cash. It's one of the best deals that you can get in the industry. They give you fast 48-hour turnaround on your bets. And let's go ahead, enter in Off the Ball over at MyBookie. Let's win together big. All right, so for my buddy Lee, for breaking the game, for the Off the Ball Network, the Nothing But Net channel on Dash Radio, for the game of basketball at large, people, we love y'all. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll catch up with y'all next time. Much love, everybody.